or which basically defines leadership as a process rather than an individual act. And it's a process of mobilizing the community. So it could be a family, it could be a team, it could be society towards values that enable that community to thrive. So I think like in this definition, like leadership is not an individual heroic act, or rather it's a process of like how the system evolves. And it's driven by all individuals in the system. So whatever action or inaction that happens in that system is all a process of mobilization.
Hello and welcome to the 10th episode of the podcast series. The Connect podcast was started with an intention to showcase the knowledge and expertise that lie within our community and through it drive meaningful connections. 10 podcasts later, and we have engaged with 11 alumni across cohorts in diverse topics, from hearing stories about life in conflict zones to understanding how fundraising and grant making looks like, from discussing what it takes to be a school leader to discovering the effects of policies in India. Today's episode is with Tarun Cherukuri, co-founder at In This Action. Tarun is a 2009 TFI fellow and also the former city director of TFI in Delhi. The topic for today is titled as Listen, Act, Change, a personal leadership development approach. So with that, please help me welcome Tarun.
Thank you, Siddharth. Thank you for having me here on the show.
Tarun, your background has been really impressive, and the amount of work that you've put in this action all these years and the kind of growth that the organization has shown has been quite a case study for so many of our alums and also upcoming fellows. So thank you so much for your contribution as well in the space. So with that, I would like to ask you the first question, which is tell us about your journey and why you do what you do.
Sure. So I think very briefly, I've had the benefit of having kind of access to world-class education, which has been mediated by lots of scholarships to study in BITS Pilani, scholarship to study in a grad school. And even my scholarship at school was mediated by Sports Authority of India. So it's really opened up the world and all of its opportunities for me. But this was in sharp contrast to the opportunities my maternal grandmother and my mother actually faced while growing up. So my grandmother could not study beyond primary and my mother could not study beyond senior secondary. And so my personal drive always has been that that should not be the case for girls and women like them. And every disadvantaged family should have early and sustainable access to rights that the Constitution provides for them so that they can irreversibly uplift themselves out of poverty. So my fundamental belief always, and which is why what I do, is that providing this basic ladder of mobility and opportunity for every vulnerable citizen in India, it should be the tenet of a just and humane society.
This is such an inspiring story, almost something like a calling that came right from a very early stage for you. Moving to the main topic, which is listen, act, change. So tell us about this philosophy. How did you come up with it and how does it work in your context?
So we wanted to really make our operating core values very easy to understand and yet at the same time very accessible as well for each and every team member. So Listen, Act, Change was kind of the core values we'd identified like in the early stages of the organization. Only around like the last one and a half year, we took a shot at translating these values into operating principles. So in the first years, we would have kind of one-liners on what these operating values would look like in terms of operating context. But we realized that it didn't become part of a common vocabulary. So it was during the last step back, we took a shot at refining these operating principles and kind of naming actually what this looks like on a daily basis. For example, under Listen, we have listen to the pain points of every child and parent as one operating principle, listening with a design thinking mindset as a second operating principle, and listening for data collection opportunities. So as you can see, like these are three different ways of listening, and this kind of covers for all formats of listening we might encounter in a daily working context. So the idea is to kind of take these operating principles and constantly reflect on examples and non-examples, which we try and do on a weekly basis when we come together as all hands on the deck kind of tactical team meeting on Friday mornings. So when we do our reflections by Thursday end of the day, we're reflecting on these principles. We're also looking at patterns over a quarter to see which principles probably need a deep dive or attention for improvement as a team. For example, the last time we did this exercise, we identified acting with urgency was one of the principles that we were struggling with at a team level, and also changing from transactional to trusting relationships is the other principle that we identified as something we would focus and work on this quarter. So yeah, this is really an attempt to kind of harmonize the thoughts, words, and actions, and give a framework of principles for everybody to do it in a generative manner.
So these principles may be, working effectively as an operating principle while working, but how has it shaped, you as an individual, or even your team members as individuals, in their daily lives? Does that have significance in like a personal front as well?
Yeah, no, absolutely. For example, like, so changing from a consumer to a producer mindset. So like all of us, when we kind of articulated it, we kind of believed in the statement. But as we started working on it, like I myself realized that I might be a producer in a work context, in my mission context, but I'm not producing enough experiences in my home context, like for my friends, for my family, for my partner. So kind of these principles like make you reflect, like, are you consistent in all forms of your life and with all your identities? At least that's been my personal experience. So I try and live my principles in kind of work context very rigorously. But I realized that I wasn't as rigorous when it comes to, say, the change principles in my home context or my personal sphere. It forced me to kind of improve on my consistency. And the other thing we do well at Indus Action is kind of bring ourselves as a whole, like not a personal and a professional self. So when somebody comes into work, we're bringing our whole selves. And so when we reflect, like we're reflecting on these principles as a whole, not just like, hey, am I upholding it in workspace, but am I actually upholding it in personal space as well? So we provide the space for such authentic and kind of open and vulnerable reflections to come in as well. And that helps people to see if they're being lopsided in how they're kind of implementing these principles, and also seek support and help in becoming better at it.
Yeah, and just out of curiosity, you have given us, the three operating principles for Listen, which was, listen to the pain point, design thinking mindset, data collection, opportunities. For ACT, also you gave us two principles, which was urgency for rights or disadvantage, and trusting relationships than transactional. So, what are the principles for change?
Sure. So for ACT, essentially, it's three principles. So one is acting with ownership narrative. So we can choose between kind of telling ourselves an ownership narrative or a victim narrative. So our principle is like operating principle is, can we tell ourselves an ownership narrative? The second principle of ACT is, can we act with urgency for access to the rights of disadvantage? So if you have a choice between today and tomorrow, can we get it done yesterday? Right. So that's the urgency with which we want to act. The third is act in solidarity with the mission's whole. So if you have a choice between optimizing your team and optimizing the mission, or optimizing yourself or optimizing your team, like, are you choosing to optimize the larger whole, right? Instead of the smaller whole. So those are the three ACT principles. In terms of change, the first change principle is changing from consumer to producer mindset. Like, are we able to produce more experiences for ourselves and our teams and mission, and really taking initiative. So the second change principle is, are we changing the usage of resources with the principle of radical frugality? So are we applying a lens of frugality in a radical manner to in how we see resources like time, money, and people? The last bit is what I mentioned. Are we able to shift our relationships from being transactional to trusting ones, not just internally, but with the external ecosystem as well?
All right. I would like to highlight the point around, having a ownership mindset than a victim mindset. This was like one of the best lines you've said so far. So thank you so much, Tarun, for that. So, how these podcasts work is that we source questions from the community. So most of the questions over here that we shared in advance were questions that people have shared for you. Over 10 individuals, took the opportunity to share questions for you. So the next question is actually from someone in the community itself, which is leadership a byproduct of your actions, or are your actions a result of your leadership?
Yeah, I was really quite confused by the question. So it was kind of what comes first. But I've kind of like always had a simplistic view of leadership. And this has been informed by kind of the course I've done in adaptive leadership, which basically means, or which basically defines leadership as a process rather than an individual act. It's a process of mobilizing a community. So it could be a family, it could be a team, it could be society, towards values that enable that community to thrive. So I think, like, in this definition, like, leadership is not an individual heroic act, or rather it's a process of like how the system evolves. And it's driven by all individuals in the system. So whatever action or inaction that happens in that system is all a process of mobilization. The fact that, okay, if I say vote, for example, Nota, that itself is a certain process of action, right? Or if I don't vote, that is also I'm signaling something, saying that, hey, I'm not participating in democracy. So in this lens, like actually the work of leadership is being done by everyone and at all times, right? So for example, if I have to apply that to Indus Action's work, so our end goal is to obviously make classrooms inclusive. And our hypothesis is if our classrooms are inclusive and schools are inclusive, we're building citizenship for a more inclusive society for the future, right? So if this end goal has to be realized, the society needs to be mobilized to do millions and millions of altruistic and generative actions. Like people need to kind of share power, give space, and kind of understand children and parents from what we consider the other. See, the other caste, the other religion, the other gender, the other class. Like so all these kind of social dividers that we have. So we need millions of kind of generative actions. So that process of mobilizing these actions is constantly being influenced as well by the reactions that we have in the society. So I feel like so leadership essentially, and in that I identify like individual actions as contributing to that melting pot, like just being clear about like how do you want to make this community thrive, and can you consistently bit by bit kind of take actions towards that direction. And over a period of time, if enough people take actions in those directions, somewhere along the line the tipping point happens, and the entire system as a whole shifts, right? So say for example, like patriarchy is not going to be broken in a day's time, but we have to constantly chip away at it, right? We have to fight for gender equity. We have to take small little actions every day, and one day like maybe the norm will significantly shift, right? So that's how I kind of like see leadership. Yeah. And I see kind of actions related to leadership.
Yeah. So the first line that you mentioned around how leadership is a process of mobilizing a community. So your answer was more towards how like are we as an individual towards a set of individuals towards with whom we are working. But what about personal leadership, like the various elements that are inside of ourselves, which is the way we treat our work, the way we treat people, the way we treat situations, even that process of how we are dealing with the world as individuals is also some sort of a personal leadership. So how does that work?
Yeah. So the way that triangulates with this process is obviously there's an internal process as well.
Yeah.
So where you're saying, okay, I have a choice between a regressive value and say a progressive value. And that of course is kind of the individual's like paradigm. What I consider regressive, what I consider progressive is my value system, right? And then like, okay, once I have that internal compass saying that, okay, this is the progressive value, and I have that thought that this is where kind of I need to be oriented towards, then like my actions need to kind of align with that progressive value. And how am I mobilizing not just my actions, but kind of my responses and reactions to what I see around me as well. So taking the same example, let's say like I believe that kind of our societies should be more gender equitable. So one is of course like how am I translating that at a family level, right? So in my companionship, like am I able to kind of share the emotional labor at a household level, right? And do I treat my didis with dignity and respect, right? Do I have a process by which like I am actually being a better employer than everybody else out there, right? So those are kind of personal choices you make, but then you extend that to kind of workspace as well. So these are all kind of personal, you could say, mobilization or leadership choices that you make. All these add up. And hopefully like when enough people do it and enough people kind of role model it, and so at some point of time it becomes a critical mass in itself.
Thank you so much, Tarun. The next question is one of the most asked question, literally out of some 10-15 questions that were shared, 5-6 of them were this, which is how can one maintain motivation, focus, discipline towards their goal? This is something that has just been the most asked question in this particular podcast series. So here you go, Tarun.
Sure. See, my thinking on this is that, look, time is what is the limited resource. I think the key to kind of maintaining with a motivation, focus, or discipline is how to position your time like towards your goals in a most effective manner. Because at the end of it, like we all have to realize that at the max we have 40 to 50 hours in a week, and if we add up, probably we have about 2,500 hours in a calendar year, right? If we're giving ourselves enough time for self-care and renewal. So just being very methodical with the fact that that is the limited time that you have. to make whatever kind of professional goals that you have work. So one is like I've seen, at least this has been a mistake I have made through my 20s as well, is assuming that I have infinite time. And so not being critical about the number of goals that I choose that I can accomplish professionally and personally. So over a period of time, like I've kind of figured out kind of the difficult art of saying no and being very rigorous about like, okay, what are my top 2 to 3 goals? And only if I accomplish these 3, maybe I'll get to my 4th goal. So I think to keep that focus and motivation, obviously for everybody, there's a different process or a hobby that gives you that space of Zen. And so I think it's important to cultivate a particular practice that helps you kind of gain deeper mastery in terms of focusing your attention, in kind of managing your motivation and discipline. So it could be like if you're a runner, if you like kind of being an athlete, like one of my mentors and board member, an athlete. So she's a triathlon athlete, and that's what gives her Zen. Or you could be a rock climber, like one of my teammates, Neha. So maybe that gives you Zen, so pursue that. Or I practice a form of mindfulness called Vipassana, so that gives me Zen. So I think it's important to cultivate an individual practice that is able to kind of root you in who you are and what you want to be, and you're constantly able to look within through that practice and able to mirror the world with that particular hobby. Mm-hmm. But apart from that, I think it's also important to keep a circle of confidants and peers who will keep you honest. That's the second practice. So first one is kind of an individual practice. The other one is having a circle, confidants and peers who will be kind of critically and brutally honest. So I kind of have a circle of almost 20 people. So this includes board members, team members, and other confidants. So keep me honest, not just in pursuit of my professional goals, say, for example, in pursuit of my personal goals as well. So everybody, for example, on my team knows that I want to do the 20-day Vipassana. So a lot of people keep checking in, hey, what happened to your application? Why was this not taken up this time? So when are you actually going to make that 20-day time? So this kind of accountability system kind of helps me calibrate always my motivations and, more importantly, lean on these people when I feel like I'm falling short. So a day or a week when I have kind of I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling frustrated. So I reach out to somebody for a quick conversation or a meal or a coffee so that I can gain my motivation and focus back to do the work that I do, and that kind of gives me that boost of motivation and focus back.
I want to ask you, this point that you meant around that whatever process or hobby that gives you Zen, you attain a deeper mastery in it. For you, it's Vipassana. So how is it linked, this attainment of Zen linked to your professional goals or discipline?
Yeah. I think so. The way we learn is not linear in the sense that, like, let's say, for example, I read a non-fiction book. It's not that that's the book that will inspire my work. If the book is, learning happens that way as well. That's a very linear way of learning. But what I've learned about learning is also analogous. Learning is also kind of inspired by creativity. So in the sense that a lot of my learning for work and inspiration and intuition for work actually comes from my hobby time. It could be Vipassana, it could be running, could be sometimes like art activities that I'm part of, though I'm not very good at it. So I realized that like this is how sometimes our learning happens. It happens in spurts of this creativity. Analogously, when we're doing something which is not actually related to the core work, where the mind is able to draw correlations between, say, how your body as a system is responding to, say, this situation, vis-a-vis like, okay, how you're responding as a person in a system at work. So that's how like I've been able to learn. Like I still keep my commitment to my hobbies like Vipassana, and so that helps me actually kind of solve some of the problems at work as well, because I'm able to draw correlations, I'm able to draw analogies and parallels. And so I believe that actually learning happens that way. There is a lot of analogous nature to our learning, but the mistake that we do is we believe that, okay, if I have to solve a problem X, that I have to do a case study or I have to read a book about the X. But sometimes like the solution to solve X actually comes from a very disjoint kind of pursuit you're making in your hobby. Like say when you're cooking or when you're meditating or whatever that gives you Zen. In that moment of Zen, you suddenly have an insight about the problem you're stuck with.
True.
So that's how I would say one has to think about your hobbies or the processes that give you Zen.
It's so true, because even in my morning runs, those are the moments when literally the ideas for work for the day get inspired by just through breathing in a rhythmic pattern. So that's so true. And
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
And I
Now, there
would
are lots
also,
of stories as
yeah,
well, right? Like how
yeah,
benzene, for example, was discovered by this person actually in his REM sleep, where he saw these snakes kind of eating each other, and suddenly I was like, okay, I've got the structure of benzene, right?
yeah,
So a lot of people who have written about creativity argue this, that like a lot of these ideas actually come between actually spurts of intense activities. So
Mhm.
that's really important. What's
True.
important is it's not a prescription for laziness or just like hobby pursuit. You
Mhm.
have to intensely pursue a problem,
Yeah,
and actually inspiration to solve that problem actually comes from the times in between solving that problem. In that moments
Mhm.
of relaxedness or laziness
Yeah,
or idleness is when creativity spurts and connects the dots of that problem. Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely. This is a beautiful answer. And out of curiosity, this is more of like a selfish question I'm going to ask out of the box. There was this line that you had mentioned that there was like certain mistakes or shortcomings that you had during your 20s. So, since a lot of the audience are going to be fellows and alumni who are in their mid or early 20s, so what are the top two things to take care of in your 20s that you would recommend to our audience?
Yeah, yeah. So I also already mentioned about time management. I think that's a really valuable skill to harness and master, because I think like the more you kind of grow up in your 20s and take on more responsibility, so you realize that this is kind of the skill which will give you a lot of leverage and a lot of scale in how much you can expand your own personal capacity. But if I have to kind of mention two other things which I learned slowly, but I wish I learned earlier, or somebody taught me at school kind of question. So one is, I think, like, how do you respond to situations instead of reacting to them? I think like my kind of aversion to conflict and me kind of learning how to handle it has taken a bit of time. And so I think learning that on how to kind of navigate psychologically unsafe environments. So even if say the work environment is say toxic or the relationship is toxic, how can you still kind of lean in and actually kind of respond to that situation in a generative manner? So I've seen myself kind of go through these cycles where I shut myself down and I try and come back. And so it takes a lot of time to get back into the groove in that relationship or in that problem. So it's taken me a while to kind of make that problem solving cycle shorter and shorter. Like where, like, let's say if it happens in a meeting, I'm able to still respond, like not react and kind of change the culture or tone of the meeting. So it's taken me a while to get better at and but I think like they were my younger days where I was more reactive, and
Yeah.
that led to kind of me not having say possibly generative relationships or not solving the problems in a timely manner. So that's one. And I think the second thing, especially for fellows and all of us are in nonprofit, I think we do struggle with accountability systems. So unlike in say a political or a corporate system, I think the markets and the you could say elections are in themselves like by design very highly accountable systems.
Mhm.
It's hard to stay relevant if you're not performing. If you don't have a strong top line, bottom line, it's hard to be a relevant business. If you don't kind of get re-elected, it's very hard to kind of be
Mhm.
relevant in a political system. But I
Mhm.
think in a non-profit, we're designed for low accountability in the sense that we can perpetually actually be in operations and kind of make ourselves viable with not as much pressure from the ecosystem. So I think like the other thing I'd highly recommend is to challenge yourself and actually have a wider accountability system, not just a manager or a few friends. Like for example, like I said, I actually have 20 people who hold me accountable.
Mhm.
And that's great because it puts a lot of, it does put a pressure on me. It's not mandated by any board structure or by any nonprofit structure to have 20 people kind of putting pressure on you. But that's the other thing I'd highly recommend, like, because I think it's important to test your own reality. And the more people you're able to hold your thoughts, your ideas, and your beliefs accountable with, I think the sharper you'll get with understanding reality and understanding the world. And this is a mistake I made in my 20s, to just be accountable to a few people, say a manager, as long as I impress my manager, as long as
Yeah.
I manage my team well. So I would hold myself accountable to 5, 6 people. But I've extended that to kind of to really get sharper at understanding reality, because we all might fall for the pitfall of getting out of sync with reality and being in a echo chamber. So to avoid that, I would highly recommend that we all kind of expand our accountability systems.
Yeah. A follow up to that, when you sort of build this circle of confidant around you, so that people hold you accountable now, obviously for that individual, they need to timely have a check on you. Whereas in this world where so many things are happening, even people forget that they have to hold someone accountable. So how like how do you ensure that these people who hold you accountable, they actually check on you on a timely basis rather than forgetting it, and then some years later you are probably asking them, okay, this is what I have done.
Right. One of course is to solve it at a selection level itself. Like,
Mhm.
can you self-select for people who have that courage and kind of the ability to speak truth to you as a friend or as a confidant or as a peer as well. So
Mhm.
one is like I try and self-select for people like who's smarter than me, who courageous than me,
Mhm.
so that they can speak truth to me. The second, of course, is if that's not the case and there's a lot of deference in the relationship, is to create a culture. So to give that permission to say like, hey, like I give you permission to critique me, I give you permission to take a shot at me. And so in
Mhm.
that sense, like every time somebody who's not used to say speaking truth to authority or power kind of
Mhm.
challenges you, it's important to recognize how difficult it is for that person.
Yeah.
So you have two choices. One is kind of you can once again react in that moment and say shut that person down or that idea down.
Yeah.
But recognizing that I have actually the responsibility to uphold the culture here, right?
Mhm.
And that's very difficult to do because in the heat of the moment, you want to kind of address that question or kind of show that the question was say, misguided, etc.
Yeah.
It might have not come across in the right style, right tone, but recognizing that as a authority figure or as a leader, you have immense responsibility to provide that space in culture as
Yeah.
well. Space for kind of such critiquing or accountability culture to develop as well.
Mhm.
So it's two ways. One is like you select those kind of people. Second,
Mhm.
once let's say if people do have some shortcomings in asking difficult questions, how do you provide that space and
Yeah.
psychological safety for those questions to surface out? Yeah.
Yeah. And does this also mean that you also have to actively be in touch with them, because ultimately this is for your own good? So you also take the initiative to sort of have a chat or bring them together so that you get to know more about yourself or how you're progressing.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, the regular structures, of course, weekly check-ins, monthly check-ins with board
Okay.
members,
Mhm.
quarterly reviews.
Yeah.
So there's regular ones. And whenever like kind of we are out of sync, like I do kind of extraordinary meetings as well. So like,
Mhm.
but there is a regular discipline saying that we're checking in on a weekly basis. We're
Yeah.
checking on a monthly basis with some board members. So there is regular calendar of check-ins I have with
Yeah.
the most important people. Up and above that, if I'm
Yeah.
still overwhelmed,
Hmm.
then I call for some extraordinary meetings. Yeah,
Sure, sure. Yeah,
yeah.
that's what I wanted to know, that how much of an initiative do you take, or is it just that the people, they themselves write to you? But yeah, thank you so much. Moving to our next section, which is, in today's world where everything is connected, it's still difficult to find a correlation between them. Should one focus on a narrow definition of one's own vision, aspirations, or be open-minded to newer ideas?
Yeah, this is a really good question. So I think like I believe like one metaphor I can think of is like think of yourself as I think of myself as an earthen pot in like a really big ocean. Like I have a small kind of set of values I hold dear, and this is the water I hold inside my pot, and it has lots of identities. There might be different colors in it, and so that's me. Like that's my various identities, and that's the values I hold. But I believe like because you're out there in the ocean, so you must always be open to the osmosis of water from the sea kind of seeping into your pot, right? Whether it's different colors, different identities, like different values. I think whether we like it or not, it's already happening because we're connected in this digital universe through different mechanisms. Somebody is already having lots of data about us and kind of priming us with different political, social, cultural information. And the way we pick up news and read it is also gamed in many ways because of the friends that we follow and what they share. So in that sense, like our pots are in many ways already, you can say, in some ways self-selected. But it's important to be open to kind of let your pot sail, just extend the metaphor, let your pot sail across the ocean, always being open to kind of new values, new colors, and yeah, so I think like that helps kind of reality testing. I call it reality testing your vision. So we might have a vision, but one thing I like about somebody said is, are you willing to kind of live with the notion that all your beliefs might have been wrong, right? And so that I find actually very kind of fascinating from an agnosticism or a scientific pursuit sense. Like I'm actually prepared to be willing to be proven that all my beliefs are wrong. So that actually excites me a lot. Like, can I kind of really be on this adventure where actually all my beliefs are wrong, and then I have to start from zero. So having that frame is very liberating, actually. Though it might be scary not to have any beliefs which are actually true, but I actually found it on the contrary to be very liberating.
Yes. This is, I was such a coincidence. Just 5 minutes before this podcast, I was reading this article, which was around, be like water, which is the famous line Bruce Lee once said, which was around how you be detached from ideas or aspirations, but you are, just like you said, you are in a liberation zone where you take the shape of whatever comes to you, but you don't submit to it. You have your own identity, but you still are very much adjustable to any situation that you go to.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think I'm the earthen pot sits in neatly with that. Like you have your water, but you're also letting kind of through this process of osmosis, let a little bit of the water on the outside seep in as well. So I like that metaphor because we don't absorb ideas like a hose pipe, right? So we also take our own time to assimilate ideas outside us. And as we get more old, the thickness of the earthen pot keeps increasing, right? So we're less permeable to outside ideas. So which is why I like that a lot. Like we slowly trickle in ideas, but can we keep in a lean earthen pot where we're able to assimilate other ideas as well and other colors as well.
So, the next question is literally like a follow-up to this. When you are, being such a easy flowing individual who lets your own ideas and other ideas to freely move, how do you set a path for yourself?
Right. See, I think my belief is that it's not necessary to have a perfect path for the rest of your life. And I think our values is what should be our compass or anchor or torchlight, whatever metaphor you use. Our values should guide us, and treat life as an adventure with this torchlight or with the sense of compass. And I'm just as long as I have clarity till the next mile on the path, I'm happy. I'm not worried about what happens by 2030 or 2050. So I'm definitely worried about what happens in the next 1,000 days, because I think, to run organizations, you need to have a strat plan for 1,000 days, and that's the expectation from everyone around you, and that gets broken down to finer goals, etc. It's important to have clarity on that time horizon, because that gives people peace of mind, certainty, and they know what to chase as goals. You yourself know what you're chasing, but I think beyond that, it's important to be kind of open and kind of spontaneous to all kind of possibilities. So I'm actually less worried about extending the metaphor, getting through this forest of life and not having a defined trail. So that is what part of the adventure is. I don't kind of want to kind of reach the top of the mountain or end of the forest for that matter. So I'm just committed to enjoying this walk, this nature trail, and carrying others along. As long as there's kind of three things I think which are important. You need to have clarity in the short run. Conviction as well that you're on the right path and you are being guided by the right values, whatever you think are your right values, and curiosity, always being open to experience something new, being proven wrong, revising your learnings, etc. So clarity, conviction, curiosity. So as long as those three are there, it doesn't matter what path you honestly take. Because you'll always be led in the right path.
And when you have a diverse team where people come from various backgrounds and beliefs, and everyone has a different notion towards their path, towards ideas, towards their sort of vision. So how do you bring them to a common platform and together you achieve towards a goal?
Right. I think simple answer is lots of conversations. And I think if you think about kind of how our early ancestors or hunter-gatherers did it as well, one of the most important inventions was language. Language is what enabled us to scale ideas, to kind of resolve conflicts and kind of build a momentum for collective action. And that is why, as Harari would say, that Homo sapiens won over Neanderthals, because they figured out how to communicate through language. So I think that's ultimately we all come together in a team for a common story and a common narrative. It's important to constantly kind of have that shared vision and shared narrative, and then kind of have multiple levels of conversations and alignments to figure out how do you convert that story into something more concrete, which is strategy, goals, tactics. So that's the process of obviously running organization. So one, of course, is like aligning the hearts, saying, do we have a common story? Do we have a common vision? That is primary. Once that primary alignment happens, then the secondary alignment is, do we have a shared strategy? Do we have shared tactics? Then do we have shared goals? And then it's just about making execution happen, providing the managerial and coaching support to ensure that execution happens on time, in full, with quality.
Yeah. So basically, like during the time of hiring itself, you sort of understand which individual can easily be sort of brought in to your strategy, to your goals, rather than someone who's a complete outlier who may not fit in to your goals.
Right. So we have constant kind of, even after selection, we give ourselves 90 days to understand each other. So the first 90 days are essentially like a two-way street where we expect the employee also to reject us if possible. If the employee finds like flags about the organization he or she didn't anticipate while accepting the offer, and likewise the other way around as well. So we say like, hey, first 90 days, let's judge each other. That's okay, right? Let's judge each other in the selection process. Let's judge each other in the first 90 days. But after 90 days, if we've had a 2x2 and we've both shaken hands and made this a permanent thing, so then let's really trust each other, right? And make this work for you and for the mission as well. So that's kind of the mindset with which we operate. More often than not, like we identify struggles in the first 90 days itself, and we try and call it off if it's not working for each other. But after 90 days, we have a good sense. And typically, like people like whom we have been able to confirm after 90 days, we kind of have a good sense that they belong here. They will be kind of long-term kind of contributors to our mission. And those are people we are willing to invest as a team in their growth and in their progress.
This is such a great correlation to how life is, where you are like dating someone for a couple of years just to understand how they are, and then ultimately you choose to marry them or not. So that's a good analogy for us.
We use that metaphor. We do say like, we actually, like all of us millennials, we date a lot of organizations, but we hardly get married. So we keep using the metaphor, saying that, hey, we need more people who get married to Intersaction. So like,
That's great. Thank you so much, Tarun. You took us through like a beautiful journey of self, team, and community through various ways of working, through various ideas and philosophies. So this was a very enriching experience for me, and I'm sure even for the audience as well. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Siddharth, for these thoughtful questions. I am hoping that the answers are helpful for some of the listeners. And if anybody wants to have a follow-up, I'm available on tarun@intersaction.org. So if anybody is picked by what I said and wants to have a follow-up conversation, or is troubled by what I said as well, I'm happy to kind of check in and have a follow-up conversation and offer that as an offering to the alumni community out there.
Yes, but we are not done yet. So I have last two questions for you, which is one of them is, what are your biggest struggles at work?
Yeah, so one of the things, like I mentioned, that I think I've learned it more as a practice, and I have not kind of learned it at school, is kind of how to navigate conflict. So I think building my own capacity, and as a leader, one of the things is whatever you struggle with, you realize that your whole team then has the same trait or characteristic. So I had a conflict aversion and a challenge in how I handled conflicts. So that has translated into whole team's edge in avoiding difficult conversations. So one of the things that we are working on as a team is building capacity for difficult conversations, and we call this like naming the elephants in the room. So building all our capacities to speak the unspeakable, or naming the elephants in the room. So that's one of the things that we're working on as a team.
And the last question is, if not this career path, then what would you do?
Yeah, this is a question I think about almost on a daily basis. So one is maybe being a mindfulness instructor for children and adults. Like this is something I almost consider on an everyday basis, a path of, say, maybe more rigorous spirituality. The other path, which is, I guess, like more rigorous political work, which is kind of running actually from behind the scenes someone's political office as a chief of staff. So I keep following, in the US context, AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So I'm actually impressed by obviously her presence, but what I actually track is her chief of staff, like Shoykot Chakrabarti. So that is one of my dream roles, to actually kind of have women in public office like her, and kind of me behind the scenes being able to run a tight ship and run her office well. So I hope like we have more women in public office, and that's another kind of career path I would have pursued if I didn't have the platform within this action.
Well, sooner or later that might happen as well. So I wish you the best for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tarun. This was a beautiful podcast. Any concluding thoughts for our audience, fellows, alumni, staff?
So I'm happy to offer my time, and like I said, if anything about kind of organizational culture or personal leadership kind of spoke to you, or you're troubled by kind of what I said as well, so I'm happy to offer my time and have a follow-up conversation. So yeah, thank you for this opportunity, and yeah, excited to hear back from some of the community members.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and the other thing I wanted to kind of, if anybody is obviously interested in this action, so there are a lot of volunteering opportunities. So you could reach out to me and we could set up interesting volunteering opportunities as well.
So this was Tarun Cherukuri on our 10th podcast of the season. And if you want to listen to our other podcasts, visit connect.teachmedia.org, the resource section. All the podcasts are there. Thank you so much.